Mr. In this 30 minutes presentation, the title of this presentation is Myth and Realities of Language Learning Implication for ELT. Mr. Huy Phung is a PhD candidate in second language studies at University of Hawaii at Manoa, and also a lecturer at Taiwan University. He specialized in instructed second language acquisition and task-based language teaching and technology-mediated communication. Before the presentation, there are a few considerations. So in case you have any questions or concerns about the presentation, feel free to leave them in the chat box so that we can gather the question for easy response in the Q&A session. Now, welcome, Mr. Huy Phung. The screen is yours. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Hong, for the nice introduction. And hello, everyone. And I could say good afternoon from Hawaii, and very happy to speak to you from Hawaii at the moment. Let me see my screen and make sure I'm also recording the talk. Okay. So this is the title of my talk. Today, I'm going to talk about the myths and realities of language learning. This is not something super new, but this could be a good way to start the conversation with all of you here. And again, thank you very much for your attention and participation today, even it is the last section of the morning. But before I start, I'd like you to either type in the chat box or type in the chat box in the platform, try to complete this sentence. So language learning is like, so can you put in the chat box what you think of this? So you can put something like language learning a language is like sweeping or riding a bike, and anything that's come up to your mic, in your mind. So can you type in the chat box if you are here with me, or even you are watching the live stream on the platform, you can type in chat box. Okay, let's see. Yep. Finding your way through unfamiliar room in the dark. Oh, yeah, that's nice. Learning to swim. Okay. So trying to type it in, or at least keep a similar in your mind. So later we can go back and then visit to this one. Let's see. We also have building up a Lego. Ah, someone checked the the survey already. Okay. Learning to drive, climbing the mountain. Okay, that's great. Okay, here's a couple of statements I came up with, and I also want to share with you. This is 10 statements, and to see how much you agree or disagree with these statements. So that's to prepare for that. I already prepared a survey, so you can answer the survey using your smartphone. You can scan the QR code, or you can enter the link on the screen, or you can enter the link in the chat box. Let me see if you can have access to the chat box. Yes. Yeah. So take around 1 or 2 minutes to complete the quick survey, just 10 statements, and to see how much you agree or disagree with each statement. So if you're here with me, here's the, you can see the survey like this one with different options, whether you are totally disagree, generally disagree, or both agree and disagree, you can put 3. Or if you generally agree, you can put 4, and totally agree, I'm sorry, not disagree, you can put 5. Okay, so I hope you can complete the survey and let me know if you have any questions about the survey and the statement. Here's the statement. Again. And let's see if I can share the result with you right away, also on my screen here. Let's see. I think if I, this is how I can share with you the screen for the result. Yeah. Okay. Thank you for being with me. Okay, let's continue my talk. So this is one way to set up, to connect you with my talk. So hopefully you can engage with the statements and follow my talk, for 20 or 30 minutes. So my agenda for today is I'm going to present some myths and realities about second language acquisition or language learning. I will try to provide some evidence for why it is a reality, and then also trying to project some kind of ideas and speculations for why it matters, and then what we can do with the information. So I could cover some kind of topic, for example, time for the best age for language learning, what is the nature of grammar, what is the root or the developmental trajectory of language learning, and how far you can learn. Can you speak the target language or English like a native speaker? So that being said, it is about time. This is one of the most important topics when it comes to language learning. People often come up with the questions. How long does it take? Do you have the answer? Yep, the answers varies, depend on a lot of things, but usually you can see out there is, you can 3 to 6 months. Yep, this can be. They have this statement, and then some people claim this information is because the fact that children of immigrants can start speaking after 6 months in a new country. So after around 6 months when they arrive in a new country, after a long period, they start speaking. So people use that kind of point to speculate about ability to speak a new language after just 3 to 6 months. And also it can be from the sales speeches or have self-proclaimed rule, right? And also this depend on what we means or what they mean by fluent of months, because those are slippery terms and it can be open for different interpretations and it can mean anything. But the reality is, language learning a new language time, a lot of time. And it also depends on learning goals. The higher, the longer. And you can be, of course, you can say that's, you can be fluent at saying aloha. That means hello in Hawaiian language in just a minute. Now you can say that, right? But usually it is not a goal for language learning. And also another point I want to point out here, that is, when we talk about the time and how long does it take to learn a language, a foreign language, months, weeks, even years are not a good measure. So it's very important to use a good measure. And in this case, I propose we use hour. It is a better unit of measurement when you talk about time and how long does it takes. Minutes is a little bit too much to handle the unit of measurement. So the fact is, learning a new language takes a lot of time. There are so many evidence for this, but here's, I just want to share a story conducted a long time ago. And recently there are many studies also come up with a similar conclusions. Basically, for English learners in the United States, where they often speak their home language. For example, they speak Vietnamese at home, but they go to school, they speak English in the school, similar to the Vietnamese context. For example, people from ethnic minority groups, they speak their home language, but they come to the classroom, they have to speak tiếng Kinh, right? Tiếng Việt in general. And from the report, it is estimated that for a child to develop their oral proficiency, it could take 3 to 5 years to develop just oral proficiency, and it could take 4 to 7 years to catch up with their peers in kind of monolingual proficiency. So that takes a lot of time. Now, years is not a good measure. We can convert this into hours. So let's see. Now, on average, we have 6,000 waking hours per year, right? And just imagine, one year, children could take around 1,000 hours at school. Now we exclude all kind of hours interacting with their family and communities outside the classroom. We just take the school time. So how many hours do you often spend at school? If you are a student and if you are a teacher, You know, now let's take the conservative estimate. That means just 1,000 hours per year at school. Now, if it is 3 or 5 years, hours, right? Or 4 to 7 years, that's good, range from 4,000 to 7 hours to reach a CAP level of proficiency that they can catch up with native speakers, peers, and friends in their. A recent report also mentioned discussed the issues of trying to answer the questions of how long does it take to learn a foreign language, and they also emphasize the importance of the rate of learning. It is not just about the hours, but also the environment, the learning environment, and the learner themselves. And please take this is the context in a second language where learners speaking home language, but they also use English at school, take English in the different school subjects, and have totally immersed either with the language. But still, it takes them around 5 to 7 years to acquire the language fully. And this one, they also provide some estimate about the number of hours it could take to acquire a new language according to different level of proficiency. But one thing I want to emphasize is, they are not based on empirical research. They just give the speculation. Another evidence is we can talk about first language acquisition. If you have a children, if you have a child, or if you have a young baby, how long does it take a baby to acquire Vietnamese? Usually fully acquire Vietnamese, and now convert the time into hours. Come up, about 14,000 of working hours for them to acquire their first language. That is for first language, and with the ideal environments, right? So basically, the idea is learning a new language takes a lot of time, and that the facts. What does this mean? This means we need to have a realistic goal setting. Take the example, the new English curriculum now from grade 3 to grade 12, they have more than 1,000 period. So I just do simple calculation. So usually for one period, we have 45 minutes. And then I time with the total number of the periods for the whole grade 12. So in total, after graduate from high school, a student will have around 866 hours of English learning, and compared to several thousand hours high level of proficiency, you can see how much from our students, right? Another implication here is important because you have limited time. If you are teachers in the classroom, you have a limited time, so it's better to use those time or the time well. How? It's important to provide them a lot of rich and diverse input, and also meaningful output opportunities for them to communicate instead of just learning in grammar. Of course, you have a lot of opportunities for them to develop fluency, for example, extensive reading, and also 1/4 of 1/4 of the time you can spend on teaching them vocabulary, grammar, pronunciation. The idea is also the 4th gen advocated by Paul Nation. So instead of just focusing on teaching them grammar and vocabulary, we should balance between input, meaningful input, output, and fluency development activity. Now let's talk about age. That's about time, right? It takes a lot of time. So people often have questions. Now parents and policymakers also have this question: what is the best age for a child to learn another language? Usually somewhere people talk about the idea that, the earlier, the better. It's not always the case. Of course, people based on the fact that, children of immigrants start slowly when they come to a new country, but after that, they surpass adults in proficiency in the long run, so they reach higher level of proficiency. And so also the idea of the earlier, the better is from the critical period hypothesis. When people reason that there is a certain age that you can acquire the language maximally. And it can also be from selection bias and commodification of English language teaching, in that, equip your child with the language skills and give them advantage to compete in the future, something like that. And or you just see a boy or a girl that he or she can speak English very well and say, wow, they start earlier and then they speak English very well. But the reality is, English earlier is not always better. And there are a lot of research show that earlier is not always better. It's only better with optimal input exposure. For example, in second language condition, like people migrate into a new country with plenty of opportunities for exposure, input exposure, and interaction in the target language. So the idea is experience is more important than age. It's not just about age. And age is also a slippery term because due to a lot of confounding variables. For example, schooling experience, schooling effect can motivate the role of age when it comes to language learning as well. So the evidence is, there are a lot of evidence support for the idea that earlier is not always better in English as a foreign language context. So starting earlier or late doesn't matter because it has no difference between who started earlier and who started late. There are a couple of studies confirm this in the context of Germany and also in Europe as well, and in Spain and other countries. So the idea that early is not always better. So the learning environment does. The learning environment counts. So it's important to have strategic use of resources and focus on the quality of instruction instead of trying to offer English program earlier at the primary school level. And also, again, the idea is that even if you are teaching at primary school level, it's important to focus on the meaningful and experience learning. For example, provide your students with rich and diverse input from stories, videos, and all sources of input instead only from teachers, right? And focus on meaning and communication, focus on oral proficiency. If you look at the curriculum issues by the Ministry of Education, they also recommend that the primary level, we need to focus on oral proficiency instead of the written proficiency. And also, one of the ideas is, defeat program is not so productive and effective. So in the literature, people also suggest that we can focus on the intensive program instead of have a defeat program, kind of 3 or 4 periods a week is cannot change much in terms of language learning outcomes. Okay, so let's talk about grammar. Here's a question. If you just search on the internet and then here's this kind of question come up a lot. So people may ask the question, do you need to learn grammar to use a language? And the myth is, grammar can be found in grammar books or textbook. And then if you just learn grammar in the textbook, you can use English or you can use the target language. This is not true because it is the misuse of the word grammar. Because for linguists and for researchers, grammar is kind of defined broadly. And the fact is grammar, this kind of grammar for you to use the target language, that is a kind of abstract, implicit, and complex mental representation of grammar. So here's an analogy for you. That is, the map is not the territory. So basically, so grammar in the textbook is just kind of a map. And so it's so different from the real world. And if you want to navigate in a new city, right, you need a kind of mental map. You don't need to look at the map. You don't. You just remember where it is now. For example, if you're at Vinh City now, you know exactly where the coffee shop, where's the school. You just have image in your mind. So that kind of grammar is needed for you to use the target language, productively. It's not kept the grammar from the textbook. So here I propose the idea that 3 types of grammar. The textbook grammar is just the map. It's much like we have the map and you think, oh, it is Vietnam. You have a map of Vietnam. This is not Vietnam. The territory is different from the map, right? And the language used doesn't mean the territory. So even you don't learn about the map of the map of Vietnam or the map of Hanoi, right? You can still navigate through Hanoi, right? Easily, even you don't learn anything about the map. So that because if they develop the mental map in your mind so that you can navigate easily, it's same for English. So I hope this analogy makes sense, when you talk about grammar. And again, the idea that, you have the idea of the map, you learn about the map, it doesn't help you to navigate through or in reality. And it's related to the idea that, what we know about the language is so different from what we can do with the language, the idea of explicit and implicit. So what you need is to develop a system of language in your mind so that you can use it for communication. So mental grammar cannot be taught. It can grow, it can evolve, it develop gradually. If you are teaching grammar, it's better to teach it in context so that learners can map forms with the meanings and functions. And it's also a good idea to consider a different approach to language teaching. For example, communicative approach, task-based approach, embrace extensive reading, listening, and viewing. It's also related to the idea of the route, the trajectory of language learning. So people may think that, the more you learn, the more you are getting better, right? But it's not always the case because language development is not linear. It can be kind of winning, like this road. So the idea that, students learn and remember what they are taught, it is not always the case. It is a full impression that of how people learn. And when you give them a test, they can remember it, but after a couple of days, they can forget. And remember the keynote speaker, he also, on the first day, he talked about the forgetting curve, right? And the fact is learners develop their own language system over time or develop their own mental grammar over time. So the idea is not new in the literature of second language acquisition. For 40 or 60 years, people also talk about the importance of learner errors. It's part of their learning. And the idea of interlanguage, where they have some characteristic of first language, some characteristic of second language, and it is systematic. It is not just the transfer from first language into second language. And also there's research in terms of order and sequence of acquisition. Something like this. Oops.
You have 10 more minutes.
Okay, thank you. I think, this one. So basically, for example, to form a question in English, right? So most of learners go through the same trajectory. They start with simple questions, kind of just raise their voice at the end of the sentence and to ask the question. And then over time, they can do the converting, right? The fronting, WH. And then over time, they can have more complicated. That question is most complicated one to acquire for a lot of English learners. So they do not acquire it once by one. Even you teach it, you practice it, but when they speak it, I still make a lot of mistake when I use ed or s, the third singular persons. Even in writing, I can do it well. So that is my mind still develop my own language system. So again, the same idea, you cannot teach the mental grammar. We need to nurture it instead of force it and provide the best conditions, a lot of meaningful input, a lot of meaningful outputs, opportunities for fluency development, extensive reading, extensive listening, extensive viewing, a lot of exposure to the target language could be a good idea. Another myth is about the ultimate achievement. How long does it take to speak like a native speaker? So a lot of learners, a lot of teachers, and a lot of people still aspire to become a native speaker. But that is not an ideal goal because it is a full impression that native speaker is the best. The fact is most learners fall short of native-like representation. Here I'm going to show you. I do not have a data for this one, but here's some data from one of the website, testyourvocabulary.com, and then on average, they show that on average, the most common vocabulary size for foreign test takers, that means foreign language learners, that is, they have around 4,500 words. And then if for people who live abroad like me and other people, I can have a vocabulary size around more than 10,000 words. But for native speakers, on average, at the age of 8, they already have a 10,000 word, and then for adults, they have 20 to 35,000 words. Now, it doesn't mean that second language learners or foreign language learners suck. It just means that basically they are way behind. But if you add up their first language, for example, in this case Vietnamese, I think I will have more vocabulary than the native speaker of one single language, right? So I look at the data for IELTS as well. So on average, so most test takers, they have a score of 6, equivalent to B2 level of proficiency according to CFR. So if you usually these have standardized tests follow the normal distribution, and we can guess, we can speculate about how many people will get the level of B2 instead of C1 or C2. Yeah. Again, the idea is that we need to have the realistic goal setting, and then it's important for learners to know that in the end they cannot speak like a native speaker, because it is just a myth. It is just something that doesn't exist. But they need to use to learn. They need to embrace opportunities to use, whether they speak well or not. It's important for them to use to learn, and important for them to communicate so that they can learn instead of just develop or learn all grammar, and hopefully one day they can put it into practice. So what do you think about the following statement after my brief talk about some myths and facts in terms of second language acquisitions and second language learning? So you can go back to this one if you can, or go back to the link and then share your thoughts with me. That could be great. So basically, I talk about 4 aspects, age, time, age, right? Grammar, the root of acquisition, the root of language learning, and the route, and of course, the ultimate achievement. So again, I want you to share this one in the chat box. To you, what does this mean by learning a language? So I hope you can come up with something. In the survey, I share 2 pictures. One is building Lego, and the second one is a plant. So for me, language learning is like growing a plant. It is organic. It is a gradual process. It is not something we can kind of break and conquer. It follows its own kind of organic developmental process. So, and it takes time. Now to end my talk, I wanted to tell you a story, and I think you may encounter this story before, but basically long time ago in China, there are farmers who really want to grow his crops, so that, and he's so impatient. And then when he sees the little plant growing up, he just pull it up a little bit so it can grow faster. But actually, after 1 or 2 days, he killed all his plants. So language development takes time. Language development follows its own process, its own organic process. You cannot force it, you cannot push it, and just respect the natural route to language development. What you can do is to nurture the plant, provide a best condition for it to grow instead of just building the Lego. So I hope this gives you some ideas and thoughts so that we can continue our conversation. Thank you very much for your listening. And if you have any questions, please share it with me. I will stop sharing the screen.
Right. Thank you so much for your really, excellent presentation. Yeah, it's so attractive, right? Now I think that we have 5 minutes for the Q&A session. Yeah, you have a lot of questions in the chat box. You can look at the,
Let's see. Okay, I will look, looking at my chat box and to see. So do you think, okay, I will start with, oops, yeah, so many of them here. Okay. Do you have the, okay, let's see. So there one question about the similar proficiency in number 10 means all students have similar proficiency in as the result. Oh, that is one of the survey items, survey statement. That's, we expect that after one course, all students achieve the same level of proficiency, or after 4 years at university, they should all reach B2 or C1 level of proficiency. Well, I could say that is not supported by research. Yeah, because students, some of them learn faster, some of them learn slower, and then there's so many factors affect language learning, and then you cannot expect the kind of uniform achievement of language proficiency. You know, we can see that in even for native speakers, whether they are English or Vietnamese speaker, we are quite diverse in terms of our language proficiency. Yeah. Okay, hopefully I can answer that question. The second question, how can I learn and improve English writing styles as much possible? Because even I read a lot, but it seems to me that is really difficult to absorb. Well, yep, it is a difficult skill. It is a skill. It is not just part of language, and because it's a skill, it needs a lot of practice. But you know, there are hypotheses that when you do a lot of readings, it really helps for literacy development for writing. So I hope you can do more writing, more reading, and then also practice writing as well. So there one question about, do you think it is not necessary to learn grammar when you begin to study a new language? Just understand the words and phrase. Can you give some suggestions? It depends on the learning goals. If you just practice for the exam, maybe you have to learn grammar. But usually there are some suggestions that you're just trying to give it a go, trying to communicate in the language, and then over time pay attention to the grammatical features when you are engaging a conversation or when you are engaging with the language. Instead of learning grammar and then apply, you learn grammar on spot. That's maybe better because you tend to retain them better. So from second language acquisition research, they tend to suggest that. Do you still have time to answer some other question? I think you have one last question here. What should we recommend for English as a foreign language when it comes to first thing to focus on grammar, vocabulary, pronunciation, or something else? I could say, and also it is from the Ministry of Education, the curriculum document. It's important to focus on communication first, focus on oral proficiency first, particularly for young learners. It's much like, just think about Vietnamese first language. If you speak first language or English, we learn to use, we communicate, and then we develop our language, and then we come to school, we learn about grammar. So we can follow the similar trend, similar approach, and it still work. People think that they need to learn everything and then they put it into practice, but in reality, that we just give it a go, we use it, and then over time it's emerge, our language emerge like a plant. It's not the building Lego. Yeah.
Yes.
And also wrote the blogs both in Vietnamese and English here and there. And thank you, Ms. Tung Chen, for sharing the website, so we can have access to the website and also read some of my notes on the topic. I will share with you the slides, and with the references information, you can read more about that.
Okay, can I have one last question?
Please.
Okay, thank you. I'm really interested in your presentation, and I learned from it that you say that age is, not. We agree that it's not like the younger the better when we learn a language. So how can you explain that the kids, they learned much better than the adults in pronunciation? So how can you explain about that?
Oh, that's a very good question. I think that is the fact that your children tend to have a better pronunciation when it comes to the language, but not in vocabulary, morphology, and grammar. There are so many reasons for that. Basically, there's some explanation for that. That's they still have some kind of flexibilities in their muscle, have the formation of their muscle strength, and also they are kind of the ear is still sensitive to acquiring different sounds, information from other language, and then channel it into something that they can use. I mean, they hear better. They can be more flexible. There's so many reasons for that, but that's one of the advantages of studying earlier. But the reason is we need to have good model, good input as well.
Yes, I totally agree. Do you have any more questions? All right. Okay. So I think that time is up for our session. And thank you very much again for your presentation. And thank you for the participation. Thank you for all the attendees for this Zoom number 5. And I wish you all good health and happiness. And I hope to see you again in our next convention, maybe in 2021. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you everyone for your participation.
Good luck with your study, Mr.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chen. I hope to see you sometime later.
Sure. Yeah. I hope so too. Bye.
Bye.
So that is the end of